Disclaimer: this program contains graphic descriptions of real crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. All parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in court. He said he just wanted peace, but to her, peace meant punishment. When a respected judge, the woman who once decided the fate of others, became the one who pulled the trigger, it wasn't justice anymore. It was heartbreak wearing a robe. And when the gun went off, it wasn't just her husband's life that ended, it was her own reflection in the law she once served. It started on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that smells like coffee and resignation. The kind where nothing seems wrong until a single sentence tears your life in two. Judge Eleanor Hart sat at the head of her kitchen table, sunlight tracing the edges of her robe like a halo turned sour. Her husband, Dr. Michael Hart, sat across from her, staring into a half-empty cup. The silence between them was years old, thick, heavy, unspoken. Then he said it, "Ellie, I think we should separate." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The clock ticked once, then again. The sound felt like a hammer striking wood, sharp, final, judicial. Eleanor's face didn't move, not yet. She'd spent her life mastering control in court, in conflict, in emotion. But inside, something cracked. "After everything we've built?" she asked softly. Her voice trembled like glass about to break. Michael sighed, the kind of sigh that comes from exhaustion, not anger. "You've built your courtroom, Ellie. I just want to find my peace." Her eyes darted to the wall, their wedding photo. She was in her robe, radiant, confident. He smiling, a man who once looked at her like she was the world. Now he couldn't even meet her gaze. "Peace," she whispered. "You think you'll find peace without me?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The judge in her wanted to argue, to cross-examine, to dismantle his reasons, to make him see sense. But the woman in her, she just felt hollow. Eleanor stared at him, her mind flooding with memories, his hand on hers the night she got her appointment to the bench, the way he used to bring her lunch to Chambers, the laughter that once filled this same kitchen. And now silence, just the sound of the refrigerator humming, and a love that had lost its pulse. "Do you love her?" she asked suddenly. His eyes flickered. "That was enough. I didn't say there's someone else," he replied. "You didn't have to." She stood slowly, each movement measured, like she was rising to deliver a verdict. "You're not leaving me, Michael. Not like this. Not after everything I gave up for you." He looked at her, then not as his wife, but as someone he no longer recognized. "Ellie," he said softly, "you can't control this one." But control was all she'd ever known. As he walked away from the table, Eleanor felt something twist inside her chest, something dark, ancient, and sharp. Love turning into humiliation, fear fermenting into rage. By the time the door closed behind him, she already knew. This wasn't the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a case, one she would never let go unresolved. From the outside, they were untouchable. The Harts were the couple everyone envied, the kind who smiled in charity photos, who sat on local boards, who people whispered about with admiration at country club dinners. She was Judge Eleanor Hart, the first woman ever appointed to the Fairmont County Superior Court, a woman who'd built her reputation on intellect and control. Every lawyer feared her raised eyebrow more than a gavel strike. He was Dr. Michael Hart, a beloved physician whose bedside manner was as gentle as his voice, known for treating patients who couldn't afford to pay. Together, they looked like balance itself, law and compassion, logic and warmth. But behind the oak doors of their mansion, that balance had shattered. Eleanor's days began with rulings and ended with red wine. She used to come home and tell Michael about her cases, about justice, ethics, the weight of human decisions. But lately, she came home to silence. Michael would be reading, his phone lighting up with messages from the clinic, from colleagues, sometimes from her. Eleanor noticed. She noticed everything. At first, it was little things. He'd come home late, smelling faintly of antiseptic and perfume. He'd forget to take off his wedding ring before bed, like it had stopped meaning anything. He stopped saying goodnight. In the courtroom, she was revered. At home, she was invisible. One evening, as she reheated leftovers alone, she saw a message flash across his phone. "You looked tired today. I hope she's not giving you a hard time again." No name, just a heart emoji. Her hands shook. For a moment, she almost dropped the plate. Michael walked in then, smiling, loosening his tie. "You're still up?" he asked casually. "Working late?" She replied, her voice steady, though her pulse was pounding. He kissed her forehead soft, absent, then disappeared into the shower. She stared at his phone until the screen went black. That night, Eleanor sat in her study, surrounded by the echoes of the courtroom. Law books, verdicts, order. She'd sentenced men for far less betrayal. Yet here she was the woman who upheld the law, sitting in the middle of emotional chaos she couldn't prosecute. She began to wonder if Michael had always been this way. If maybe the nurse, the perfume, the distance were all symptoms of a marriage that had been sick long before he spoke the word divorce. The next morning, she looked at herself in the mirror. Her robe hung perfectly. Her hair immaculate, but the eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that once read people like open cases, now looked fractured. Something inside her had shifted. In court, she sentenced a man to 15 years for stabbing his wife in a fit of rage. As he screamed, she barely flinched, but later in her chambers, she whispered under her breath, "At least his wife provoked him." She startled herself. Was she defending him or herself? That night, she found Michael asleep on the couch. The TV flickered across his face. His phone buzzed again, faintly lighting the table. "Dreaming of you tonight. See." Eleanor sat in the dark, watching him breathe. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. And in that silence, a thought whispered through her mind like poison through a vein. He broke his vows. He lied under oath. She closed her eyes. The judge inside her had just found the doctor guilty. And all that remained now was sentencing. It began quietly, as all collapses do. 3 weeks after that morning at the kitchen table, the first whispers started making their way through the courthouse hallways. A bailiff mentioned that Judge Hart had been different. Her rulings were sharper, her patience thinner. One clerk said she'd seen Eleanor sitting in her chambers long after dark, staring at an empty chair across from her desk, whispering under her breath like she was still cross, examining a ghost. But the real shift wasn't in her courtroom, it was in her eyes. Those who knew her best said they'd never seen them so tired, so hollow. Her gaze used to command a room. It made even the most confident attorney stumble over words. Now it lingered too long, like she was searching for something just beyond sight. At home, Michael had begun sleeping at the apartment he rented downtown. The neighbors noticed the change: one car missing from the driveway, one porch light left on all night. When people asked, Eleanor would smile tightly and say, "He's traveling for work." But even her smile looked practiced now, like she was reciting lines she didn't believe. At the courthouse cafe, one of her colleagues tried to comfort her. "You're strong, Ellie," they said. "Marriages fall apart all the time. You'll get through it." Eleanor just stared into her untouched coffee. "People only say that when they've never been left," she murmured. That night, she drove by his new apartment, parked across the street, watched his lights go out. It wasn't jealousy, it was curiosity. That's what she told herself, the same curiosity that had made her a good judge, the need to understand motives. But what she was really looking for wasn't motive, it was proof that she hadn't been the fool. The next day, the whispers grew louder. Someone from the clerk's office saw her arguing with a man in the parking lot, a young defense attorney named Caleb Sloan. It looked intense, the witness said later. Not professional. Rumor had it that she'd gone out with him one night, just drinks, just talking. But talking can turn into confession, and confession can turn into danger, especially when the person listening has something to gain. Caleb was ambitious, reckless, and flattered by the attention of a woman like her. "You're a legend," he told her one night over whiskey. "The kind of judge who doesn't need the law, she is the law." Eleanor smiled faintly, but her hand trembled as she lifted the glass. "Even legends can break," she whispered, and she was breaking, slowly, invisibly. Back at home, she found one of Michael's old cufflinks under the dresser. She picked it up, ran her thumb over the initials MH. And something inside her chest twisted like a knot tightening. That night, she wrote in her journal, "The house still smells like him. I keep hearing the door open, but no one comes in. I sentenced men for less betrayal than this, and yet I can't sentence myself." The next morning, she walked into court wearing black, not her usual robe, but a new suit. Her clerk noticed the color. "You look powerful, Judge Hart," she said. Eleanor smiled. "Powerful is all that's left." By that afternoon, she'd ordered recess early, the first time in years she'd left a case unfinished. She drove home, ignoring her ringing phone, ignoring the texts from Caleb. In her rearview mirror, the courthouse faded into a blur. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a judge at all. She felt like a woman heading toward a sentence. She was already writing one she wouldn't escape. The town began to whisper louder. The judge was unraveling. And somewhere downtown, Dr. Michael Hart was preparing to come back to collect the rest of his things, to end what remained of a marriage that had once looked perfect on paper. But Eleanor was done losing. And the law, her law, was about to take matters into its own hands. By the time dusk settled over Fairmont County, the house on Willowbrook Drive felt more like a memory than a home. The air was heavy, still, like it was waiting for something to break. Judge Eleanor Hart stood at the edge of her living room, barefoot, holding a half-empty glass of red wine. The curtains were drawn, the lights dimmed, and the sound of rain whispered against the windows. It had been 3 weeks since Michael left, but everything inside the house still bore his fingerprints, his favorite chair, his framed diploma, the smell of his aftershave still clinging to the closet. She'd tried to erase him thrown away shirts, burned old photographs in the fireplace, but somehow he remained, like a verdict that wouldn't dissolve no matter how many times it was appealed. Her mind had started to drift in loops. Sleep came in fragments, flashes of their laughter from years ago, replaced by the echo of his voice saying the word separate. She hated that word. It didn't sound like freedom. It sounded like surgery. And tomorrow, he'd be back to collect the last of his things, to make it official. She poured another glass and sat at her writing desk, the same desk where she'd once prepared her ruling sentences that carried weight, order, closure. But tonight, her hand trembled as she opened her leather-bound journal and wrote, "He wants peace. I want truth. He wants to walk away clean, but there is no clean break from love. There is only blood or silence." Her handwriting was uneven, frantic. The pen tore through the paper in places. She closed the journal, stood, and walked to the cabinet beside the bookshelf, the one she never opened unless necessary. Inside, wrapped in cloth and dust, was her father's revolver, a Colt .38. He'd been a sheriff once, a man who believed in swift justice. He used to tell her, "Never raise this unless you're ready to live with what follows." She ran her hand over the cold metal. For a long time, she just stared at it the way some people stare into mirrors, looking for a reflection of who they used to be. Then she placed it on the table, loaded it, slowly, deliberately. The first clap of thunder broke outside. Eleanor walked through each room of the house, touching everything one last time. The piano, the wedding photo, the empty side of the bed. Her robe dragged softly across the floorboards as she whispered under her breath, "We said forever, Michael. Forever doesn't end with boxes." She stopped by the window and watched the rain pour harder, the street lamps blurring in the downpour. Somewhere beyond those lights, he was probably sitting in his apartment, unaware that his wife, the judge who once ruled on the fate of strangers, had just decided his. A call came in, Caleb Sloan. She ignored it. Another text followed. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." She deleted it without reading further. She wasn't alone, not really. The voices in her head were company enough, fragments of courtroom dialogue looping back at her. The law doesn't bend for emotion, but hadn't it always bent for men like him, for men who promised love and left women in ruins? The storm outside raged louder. She sat down on the couch, the revolver beside her, and turned on one of Michael's old jazz records. The crackle of the vinyl filled the silence, followed by a soft trumpet line, Chet Baker, his favorite. The melody wound through the house like a ghost. For a moment, she let herself cry, the kind of silent crying that doesn't make sound, just tremors. She hated herself for it, hated that he could still reach her even when he was gone. When the song ended, she stood, picked up the revolver, walked to the mirror. Her reflection looked back, robe, pale skin, hollow eyes, wine, stained lips, a judge, a woman, a verdict waiting to happen. And with a quiet, almost tender voice, she said to her reflection, "Tomorrow, we settle this, once and for all." Then she turned off the lights, left the record spinning, and walked upstairs into the dark. Outside, thunder rolled again. Inside, her justice was already loading the chamber. The storm had passed by dawn. What remained was that eerie quiet that follows a night of thunder, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Judge Eleanor Hart stood in her kitchen, dressed immaculately in a pale silk robe. The scent of coffee and cinnamon drifted through the air, wrapping the house in false warmth. Her eyes were steady, her posture perfect, her hands calm. You'd never guess that inside her chest a war was raging. At 8:47 a.m., the sound of tires crunched up the driveway. She didn't look up. She knew it was him. She could tell by the rhythm of the engine, the way it slowed at the gate. Dr. Michael Hart had come home, to her, to the house, to his ending. The front door opened with a soft click. "Ellie," he called. His voice was gentle, cautious, almost apologetic. "I'll just grab the last of my things, all right." She smiled faintly, her back still turned. "I made coffee," she said. "You should have one last cup before you go." Michael hesitated. He could sense something strange in her tone, too calm, too kind, but he followed the smell of cinnamon to the kitchen, where she stood with 2 mugs on the counter. For a moment, they looked almost normal again. 2 people who'd loved, fought, aged together. Almost, he took a seat. "You look good," he said softly. "Better, actually. I was worried about you." Eleanor's lips curved upward. "You don't need to worry anymore." He sipped his coffee, exhaled. "Ellie, I'm not here to hurt you. I just want us to move forward peacefully. We both deserve that. Peace, that word again." She looked at him, really looked, and saw everything that had gone wrong in the mirror of his calm. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. That was the worst part. He pitied her, and pity to Eleanor Hart was unforgivable. "Do you remember what you said to me on our wedding day?" she asked suddenly. Michael blinked. "Ellie, please, you said you're my home. You said that. I remember because it was raining that day too, and you told me you'd never walk away." Her voice trembled now, the veneer beginning to crack. "So tell me, Michael, when did that stop being true?" He sighed, eyes tired. "Ellie, I can't do this anymore. You're angry all the time. You treat me like another case you're trying to win." "Maybe you were a case," she snapped. "One I never should have taken." The silence after that was heavy, final. Michael stood, brushing his hands against his jeans. "I'm not here to fight. Just let me take my things." Eleanor's voice softened suddenly. "Of course, go ahead." He turned toward the hallway, walked past the pictures of them smiling, traveling, pretending. He reached the living room, where his suitcase sat neatly packed by the door. And that's when she called after him, voice trembling, "Michael, before you go, I need to hear you say it, that it's really over." He stopped, turned slowly. "It's over, Ellie. It's been over for a long time." The world went still. Her breath caught in her throat. The look on her face, it wasn't rage. It was heartbreak wearing the mask of resolve. She reached under the kitchen counter. Her father's revolver gleamed in the morning light. "Then this," she whispered, "is my closing argument." Michael froze, hands raised instinctively. "Ellie, no, put it down. We can fix this, please." Her voice was calm now, eerily calm. "You swore an oath to me, Michael. You broke it. You lied under oath." He stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on hers. "You're not a judge right now. You're my wife. Please, don't do this." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't know the difference anymore." The gun fired once. Then again, the sound tore through the quiet neighborhood, a thunderclap after the storm. When police arrived minutes later, they found her sitting on the floor beside him, her robe stained dark, her hand still holding the weapon. His eyes, the eyes that once looked at her with love, were open but empty, staring at nothing. She looked up at the officers, expression blank, voice almost serene. "He wanted peace," she said softly. "I gave him justice." The blast echoed down Willowbrook Drive like a thunderclap that refused to fade. Dogs barked, curtains shifted. A woman across the street dropped her watering can. For a few seconds, there was nothing, no scream, no second shot, no sound at all. Then came the faint clatter of metal against tile and a soft, broken voice whispering through the stillness. He asked for peace. Inside the Hart residence, the air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and coffee. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, cutting through the haze like a cruel spotlight. Michael lay by the edge of the counter, a red bloom spreading across his shirt. The cinnamon coffee had spilled across the floor, mingling with blood. Eleanor stood above him, motionless, barefoot, robe-stained. The revolver slipped from her trembling hand and landed beside his outstretched fingers. For a long moment she just stared. The silence was suffocating. She took a step closer, knelt down beside him, and brushed his hair back gently the same way she had when he came home late from night shifts. "Michael," she whispered, "you were supposed to love me through it." Her hands were shaking, but her expression stayed eerily calm, the kind of calm she wore when delivering verdicts. Only this time there was no jury, no defense, no appeal. When the sirens finally pierced the silence, she didn't flinch. She just walked to the living room, sat on the couch, and waited. First officer to arrive was Sergeant Renee Collins. She later described the scene as eerily pristine, like a photograph staged for tragedy. Eleanor looked up when they entered, her eyes glassy but composed. "He's in the kitchen," she said softly. "He won't need a doctor." Renee's partner rushed past her, calling for backup, but Eleanor kept talking slowly, almost as if reciting testimony. "He said it was over," she murmured. "He broke his vows. I gave him justice." Renee lowered her weapon, her voice trembling. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the gun." Eleanor blinked, confused as if she hadn't realized she'd already done what they feared. "I'm unarmed," she said. "The evidence is on the floor." The words "the evidence" sent a chill through the officers. This wasn't a crime of chaos. It was the aftermath of deliberation. When they escorted her outside, neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, whispering her name like it was both curse and confession. Judge Hart. One man muttered, "You mean the Judge Hart?" Someone else whispered, "I heard she lost her mind after he left." No one dared speak louder than that. As they placed her in the back of the patrol car, Eleanor looked out at the sky. The storm clouds had cleared completely, leaving nothing but sunlight, harsh, unforgiving. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, pale and empty. The dash cam caught her final words before the car drove away. "The sentence has been carried out." At the station, she refused a lawyer. "There's nothing to defend," she told the detectives. But as the hours passed and the adrenaline drained away, her mind began to unravel in quiet fragments. When Detective Rowan Pierce entered the interrogation room, she greeted him like an old colleague. "You're here for the facts," she said. "I've spent my life living by them." He nodded carefully. "Then give me the facts, Judge." She folded her hands, her tone eerily professional. "Fact 1, she said, he lied. Fact 2, I discovered the truth. Fact 3, justice was due." Rowan leaned forward. "And the verdict?" She looked up, her eyes glassy. "Guilty," she whispered. He stared at her, unsure whether she meant him or herself. When they led her away to holding, she passed by a television in the hallway. The screen showed breaking news, her own house surrounded by police tape. Her name scrolling in bold, "Judge Eleanor Hart arrested for the murder of husband Dr. Michael Hart." She stopped for just a second, watching the footage. Then she smiled faintly and said, "At least they finally spelled my name right." Outside, reporters were already calling it the verdict of the heart. But for Eleanor Hart, the trial hadn't even begun. The judge had just become the accused, Detective Rowan Pierce would later say that stepping into the Hart residence felt like walking into a crime scene designed by the victim himself, sterile, deliberate, and heavy with unspoken logic. The smell of coffee and cordite still lingered when the crime scene team began their slow, methodical sweep. The radio murmured softly in the background, the chatter of dispatch muffled beneath the creak of polished floors. On the kitchen counter, beside two untouched plates and an overturned mug, lay a sheet of paper titled in her neat, judicial handwriting, "Closing Arguments." The contents were short, chillingly so. He vowed before God and law to love, honor, and remain. He broke that vow. In my courtroom, perjury carries a sentence. In my house, it carries consequence. Underneath it, she'd signed it Eleanor M. Hart, Judge, Fairmont County Circuit Court. It wasn't a note, it was a ruling. Detective Pierce bagged the paper himself, staring at it for a long time. She didn't lose control. He muttered, she built it. Piece by piece, the evidence painted a portrait more unnerving than any crime of passion. There were no defensive wounds on Michael Hart, no signs of a struggle. His suitcase was zipped, his keys and phone neatly placed on the table. The coffee was poured, the chairs were aligned almost ceremonial. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography. Then came the journals, dozens of them leather, bound, meticulously kept, stacked in her study like volumes of law reports. Inside, her handwriting transformed gradually from graceful loops to erratic scratches. He thinks I don't notice the perfume. They call me cold. Maybe justice was always meant to be. He will leave, but I will decide how. Detectives found the last entry, dated the night before the murder. Tomorrow he collects his things. I'll collect my closure. When Pierce read that line aloud, the room went quiet. This wasn't a spur of the moment, he said grimly. It was sentencing day. Meanwhile, the forensic team confirmed what everyone already suspected: the revolver was clean. No prints except hers. No hesitation marks. No smudges from recoil panic. She'd fired twice, both bullets precise, controlled. The second one, the eyes? Why the eyes? One rookie officer whispered, staring at the photos. Pierce didn't answer right away. Then, softly, because that's where he used to look at her. And she couldn't stand to see him look away again. In her chambers downtown, word spread like wildfire. The courthouse, once her sanctuary, turned into a whispering gallery. Colleagues traded disbelief like rumors in a funeral line. She was brilliant, one clerk said, but lately, she started blurring the line between law and love. A prosecutor who'd once clerked under her put it differently. She thought justice was personal. I guess we all found out how personal. When Detective Pierce visited her in holding, she greeted him the same way she had before: calm, composed, almost cordial. Her hair was neatly tied, her hands folded on the table like she was back on the bench. Judge Hart, he began carefully, "We've read your journals." She smiled faintly. "Then you already know why. Help me understand something." He said, "You spent your life upholding the law. How does a woman like you cross that line?" She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "There was no line, detective. The law is what I say it is, and love," she paused, her voice trembling with quiet venom, "is the cruelest court of all." He studied her for a moment. "You don't seem sorry." Eleanor tilted her head. Would an apology change the verdict? That answer chilled him more than the crime itself. As she was led back to her cell, reporters gathered outside, flashes lighting up the hallway like courtroom lightning. Through the noise, someone shouted, "Judge Hart, do you have any remorse?" She stopped just long enough to look straight into the cameras and say, "For breaking the law, no. For loving the wrong man." Every day, the footage aired nationwide. By nightfall, social media had already crowned her with a name she would never escape: the widow judge. But inside the station, Detective Pierce wasn't done. He still had one more piece of evidence to review: a voicemail Michael had left on a friend's phone less than 12 hours before his death. "I think she's calmer now. We'll just talk, pack up, and I'll be gone by noon." She's a judge, she understands boundaries. He paused before hanging up, God, I hope she understands. She didn't, and by morning, his hope, like his heartbeat, was gone. The trial of Judge Eleanor Hart began 6 months later, but by then, the world already thought it knew her story. Headlines called her the widow judge, the gavel killer, the woman who mistook love for law. Every photograph of her showed the same expression, blank, regal, unreadable. The same face that once commanded silence in court now stared out from newspapers across America, framed by bars instead of wood panels. The courthouse that had once risen to its feet when she entered now stood as her stage of judgment, and in a cruel twist of fate, her case was being tried in her own courtroom. The seal on the wall still bore her initials. The chair behind the bench where she had once handed down sentences had been replaced with another judge, a younger man, one she'd personally sworn in 3 years earlier. When she walked in, shackled at the wrists, there was a murmur from the gallery, a mix of pity, fascination, and morbid awe. Reporters filled every seat. Court staff whispered. Former colleagues avoided her eyes. Eleanor didn't look at anyone. She stood tall, calm, deliberate the way she always had. Her defense attorney whispered, "Remember, Eleanor, show remorse." "They need to see the woman, not the judge." She replied softly, "The woman is why I'm here." The prosecution wasted no time building its case. District Attorney Helen Graves was known for her precision, cold, ruthless, surgical. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, pacing before the bench, "this was not a crime of passion. It was a calculated execution." Judge Hart didn't lose control. She planned, prepared, and performed an act of vengeance, and then sat beside her husband's body as if waiting for the verdict. She paused, her tone lowering. She spent her life preaching that no one is above the law. Yet, when faced with heartbreak, she decided that she was. The jury watched the exhibits appear on screen, the journals, the closing arguments, a note, the gun, the photos. One juror turned away as the images of Michael Hart's body filled the courtroom. Another, an older woman, wept quietly. When the prosecution played Eleanor's recorded confession, her voice calm and steady, saying, "He wanted peace. I gave him justice." The gallery fell completely silent. The defense argued mental breakdown, years of emotional abuse, professional pressure, the crumbling of identity. Her attorney painted her as a brilliant mind fractured under the weight of betrayal. But Eleanor herself refused that narrative. When she took the stand against her counsel's advice, the courtroom held its breath. She raised her right hand to take the oath, and for the first time since her arrest, her voice wavered. "I swear to tell the truth," she said, "though truth has cost me everything." Her lawyer tried to steer the questions toward sympathy. "Judge Hart, would you say you were emotionally unstable that day?" "No," she replied. "I was perfectly clear." "Did you intend to kill your husband?" "I intended," she said slowly, "to end the lie." Helen Graves rose for cross-examination, eyes sharp. "You say you know justice, Judge Hart. Tell me, where was the justice in taking a man's life because he stopped loving you?" Eleanor looked straight at her. "Love is a promise," she said. "Breaking it is perjury of the soul. And you decided to be the jury, judge, and executioner." "I decided to be honest," Eleanor replied. Her answer rippled through the room, half gasp, half disbelief. The prosecutor stepped closer. "You talk about law, but the truth is, you killed out of pride, didn't you? Because he no longer looked at you the way he used to." Eleanor hesitated. For the first time, her composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're wrong," she whispered. "I killed him because he looked at me and didn't see me anymore." Gasps echoed across the room. The judge called for order, his gavel slamming down, but the damage was done. Jury had seen the truth behind the mask, not a cold monster, but a broken heart wearing the armor of righteousness. For the rest of the trial, Eleanor barely spoke. She watched as witnesses, her former clerk, her bailiff, even Caleb Sloan took the stand. Caleb's testimony was the most painful. He spoke nervously, hands shaking. "She wasn't crazy," he said, "just lonely. She kept saying she'd lost control of the story, that everyone saw her as a judge, not a person. I didn't think she'd do something like this." "Did she ever threaten her husband?" The prosecutor asked, "No," but she said. She said love was a case she needed to close. By the final day of trial, the courtroom felt like a mausoleum not just for Michael Hart, but for the woman Eleanor used to be. When closing arguments began, Helen Graves' voice filled the room like a final bell. She taught us that justice required restraint, she said, but what we saw here was obsession, a woman who mistook her gavel for God, and when her world fell apart, she used both to destroy it. Then the defense stood. Eleanor Hart was a judge before she was a wife before she was a killer. Somewhere between those titles, she forgot who she was. This is not just a story of murder, it's a story of collapse. A woman who gave her life to the law until it consumed her heart. The judge dismissed the jury for deliberation. Eleanor sat still, eyes unfocused, lips moving in silence. Some said she was praying. Others said she was rehearsing her own verdict. When the jury returned 4 hours later, Foreman's voice trembled. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Eleanor Marie Hart, guilty of murder in the first degree." The courtroom erupted. Some gasped, some sobbed, some just stared. Eleanor didn't flinch. She stood, straightened her posture, and turned toward the gallery, her voice clear. "Eyes steady. The verdict is fair," she said quietly. "Justice has been served." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the judge paused, uncertain whether she was accepting guilt or pronouncing it. As the deputies led her away, she stopped by the door, turned her head toward the courtroom she once ruled, and whispered, "Court is adjourned." The doors closed behind her. The day of sentencing arrived beneath a cold gray sky, the kind that makes the world feel smaller. By then, Judge Eleanor Hart had been stripped of everything that once defined her: a robe, her title, her ring, but she still carried herself like she was walking into her own courtroom, head held high, shoulders straight, eyes steady. The gallery was packed. Reporters lined the walls, cameras flashing, pens scratching like whispers of judgment. In the front row sat Michael's sister, Clara Hart, clutching a folded handkerchief in both trembling hands. She hadn't spoken to Eleanor since the funeral, not once. The presiding judge, the same young man she had once sworn in, shifted uneasily at the bench. The irony was unbearable. He looked down at her and said softly, "Mrs. Hart, before sentencing, you have the right to make a statement." The courtroom fell silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Eleanor rose. Her orange jumpsuit looked out of place against her posture, elegant, defiant, proud. She turned not to the judge, but to the gallery. Her gaze found Clara's and held it. "When I first put on that robe," she began, her voice low but steady, "I believed justice was absolute, that if you followed the law, truth would follow you. But I've learned something since then." She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she continued. "The law can't measure pain. It can't understand betrayal. It can't tell the difference between mercy and madness." Clara stared at her, jaw tight, eyes burning. Eleanor's tone softened. "I didn't kill a stranger, Your Honor. I killed the man who once promised to love me until death. I just never realized I'd be the one to deliver it." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom, a collective gasp. The presiding judge swallowed hard. "Mrs. Hart, are you expressing remorse for your actions?" She looked directly at him, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting across her lips. "I regret that he made me do it," she said. "I regret that love made me blind to reason, but remorse—" She shook her head. "Remorse is for mistakes. What I did was inevitable." Clara stood abruptly, tears streaking her face. "You took my brother from me," she cried out. Eleanor turned her gaze toward her. For the first time, the mask cracked not into anger, but sorrow. Her voice fell to a whisper. "No, Clara. I took myself too." The bailiff motioned for silence. The judge cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "Mrs. Hart, please be seated." She sat, her hands folded neatly on the table as the room stilled once more. The judge's voice trembled slightly as he read the sentence. "Eleanor Marie Hart, for the crime of first-degree murder, this court hereby sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The words hung heavy, final, echoing against the marble walls like the tolling of a bell. She didn't react, didn't cry, didn't plead. Instead, she rose, nodded respectfully to the judge, and said, Thank you for your fairness." It wasn't sarcasm. It was sincerity, the strange, haunting calm of a woman who believed justice in the end had been served. As she was led away, a reporter shouted, "Judge Hart, do you believe you deserved this sentence?" She stopped for just a moment, her eyes distant, her voice almost gentle. "Every sentence I ever gave was a mirror," she said. "I just never expected to stand in front of my own." They led her down the hall, chains clinking softly with each step. From the gallery, Clara Hart sobbed uncontrollably, clutching the photograph of her brother to her chest. And for a brief second, just one, Eleanor turned her head slightly, as if listening to a verdict only she could hear. Outside, the sky began to rain again, slow, steady, endless. Inside, the sound of her footsteps faded into the distance. The judge who once delivered verdicts had finally received her own, and somewhere deep inside her, beneath the pride, the madness, the ruin, she accepted it, not as punishment, but as closure. The world moved on, but within the concrete walls of Fairmont State Penitentiary, time stood perfectly still. Judge Eleanor Hart became inmate 44,392. The woman who once dictated the fate of others now woke to the clang of metal doors, the echo of footsteps, and the unrelenting hum of fluorescent lights. Her cell was small, a cot, a sink, a desk. No bookshelves, no robes, no framed certificates, just a single barred window that overlooked a yard she rarely entered. Each morning, she folded her blanket with precision, lined her shoes parallel beneath the bed, and sat with her back straight as if court were still in session. But there was no gavel here, only silence. Eleanor had learned to live inside it. At first, the other inmates kept their distance. Some had once stood before her bench. They recognized her immediately. "That's the judge." One whispered in the cafeteria, "The one who shot her husband." Another muttered, "She gave me 8 years for armed robbery." Guess Karma's got a sense of humor, but she didn't flinch at the whispers. If anything, she seemed relieved. In her first interview with the prison psychologist, she spoke with chilling calm. "I don't fear judgment anymore," she said. "I lived my whole life fearing it from others, from God. From myself, now I've met it." "Do you believe what you did was justice?" the doctor asked. She smiled faintly. "It was law." "My law," the psychologist noted in her file, "displays no remorse, rationalizes murder as moral correction, deliberate, articulate, emotionally detached, possible delusional belief in self-authority." But even he couldn't deny something unsettling. Eleanor's composure wasn't arrogance, it was surrender. She wasn't fighting reality anymore. She was living inside her verdict. Months turned to years. The once famed judge faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, fresher tragedies. But within the prison, Eleanor became an eerie sort of legend. Inmates began coming to her for advice. Disputes, appeals, letters to their families. She'd sit at the edge of her cot, reading their words carefully, correcting their phrasing, guiding their statements. "Don't write like you're begging," she'd say. "Write like you still matter." They started calling her the judge, again not mockingly, but almost reverently. Even the guards treated her with quiet caution. She was polite, precise, unnervingly consistent. One officer said, "It's like she's still in court, only now she's judging herself every day." In her 3rd year, a journalist from the Fairmont Chronicle was granted an interview. He'd written about her case before the fall from grace, the irony of justice undone. Now, sitting across from her through the glass, he found himself unsettled. She looked older, thinner, her hair streaked with gray. But her eyes, those eyes, still burned with the same sharp clarity that once made juries tremble. "Judge Hart," he began, "why do you think people are still fascinated by your story?" She smiled faintly. "Because everyone believes they know what they would do. Until love decides for them." He leaned forward. "Do you still believe what you did was right?" Her fingers tapped lightly against the table, as if marking rhythm to an unspoken thought. "Right and wrong are luxuries of the free," she said. "In here, there's only truth. And my truth is simple. I loved him too much to let him leave." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the glass partition. "The law can't fix that kind of love. It can only punish it." The journalist hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you ever think of him?" Eleanor's eyes soften for the first time. Every night, I hear his footsteps in the hallway before I fall asleep. Sometimes I wake up expecting him to walk through the door. A long silence followed. Then she added, almost to herself, maybe this cell is what I wanted all along. A place where he can never leave me again. The journalist's pen stopped moving. He realized she wasn't just serving time. She was living her own sentence, one she'd written years before with a trigger instead of a pen. In her 5th year, the warden found a letter on her desk, written in Eleanor's elegant script. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It simply read, "Justice is not blind. It sees everything, it just refuses to feel, and that was always my mistake." She never explained it. She didn't need to. By her 7th year, she had aged into something ghost-like, a relic of what happens when righteousness corrodes into ruin. Still, she remained composed, disciplined, dignified. Every time new inmates arrived, she'd tell them the same words she once told witnesses on the stand: speak carefully. The truth is listening. When she turned 60, a reporter asked if she'd ever consider applying for clemency. Eleanor chuckled softly. "Clemency is for the innocent. I got what I earned." Then, almost wistfully, she added, "I used to think freedom meant walking out of those gates. Now I know freedom is accepting the verdict." The guard who escorted her back to her cell that day said she stopped halfway down the corridor, looked through the narrow window toward the sunset, and whispered something. He couldn't make out every word, but he was certain he heard her say, "Case closed." And then she smiled, a small, weary smile, not of victory, not of peace, but of surrender, the kind that only comes when justice and tragedy finally blur into one. She spent her life believing that justice was balance, that if you weighed the evidence carefully enough, truth would reveal itself. But in the end, Eleanor Hart learned the hardest truth of all. Justice has no heart, and love has no rules. Inside the echo of that courtroom, the story of Judge Eleanor Hart still lingers, not as a case, not as a cautionary tale, but as a mirror. She was a woman who gave her life to the law, who believed order could save her from pain. But the one thing she couldn't control was the very thing she judged in others, her own humanity. Behind her gavel, she learned to hide emotion behind reason, grief behind principle, heartbreak behind logic. But logic doesn't stop love from decaying. And when that decay finally reached her, it didn't whisper, it roared. She thought the law would protect her from chaos. Instead, it became the weapon she used to destroy herself. When people speak her name now, they don't talk about her rulings or her brilliance. They talk about that morning. The sound of 2 shots that turned a marriage into a crime scene. The woman who sat beside her husband's body and called it justice. But what they miss, what makes her story so haunting, is that Eleanor Hart never stopped being a judge. Even in her cell, even in her silence, she kept weighing evidence. She replayed every word, every look, every choice, searching for the moment where love turned into verdict. And in the end, she found it. It wasn't the day he said, "I want a divorce." It wasn't the day she pulled the trigger. It was the moment she stopped seeing him as a man and started seeing him as a case she had to win. Because that's the thing about control, it's an illusion dressed as strength. You can't control love. You can't legislate pain. You can only decide what kind of person you become when both fall apart. Eleanor thought justice and love were opposites, but they weren't. They were reflections. Both demanded faith, both demanded surrender, and she could do neither. So when her world collapsed, she didn't fall, she ruled, and her ruling was fatal. In the final years of her life, the prison chaplain said she never asked for forgiveness. But sometimes when the chapel was empty, she'd sit at the back row, staring at the stained glass window of a woman holding scales, and whisper, "I finally understand. Justice never loved me back." They say justice is blind. Maybe that's the problem, because if it could see, it would know that some crimes aren't born of hate, they're born of heartbreak, and no sentence, no verdict, no prison can ever undo that. When people speak her name now, they don't talk about her rulings or her brilliance. They talk about that morning, the sound of 2 shots that turned a marriage into a crime scene, the woman who sat beside her husband's body and called it justice. But what they miss, what makes her story so haunting, is that Eleanor Hart never stopped being a judge. Even in her cell, even in her silence, she kept weighing evidence. She replayed every word, every look, every choice, searching for the moment where love turned into verdict. And in the end, she found it. It wasn't the day he said, "I want a divorce." It wasn't the day she pulled the trigger. It was the moment she stopped seeing him as a man and started seeing him as a case she had to win. Because that's the thing about control, it's an illusion dressed as strength. You can't control love. You can't legislate pain. You can only decide what kind of person you become when both fall apart. Eleanor thought justice and love were opposites, but they weren't. They were reflections. Both demanded faith. Both demanded surrender, and she could do neither. So when her world collapsed, she didn't fall. She ruled, and her ruling was fatal. In the final years of her life, the prison chaplain said she never asked for forgiveness. But sometimes when the chapel was empty, she'd sit at the back row, staring at the stained glass window of a woman holding scales, and whisper, "I finally understand. Justice never loved me back." They say justice is blind. Maybe that's the problem, because if it could see, it would know that some crimes aren't born of hate, they're born of heartbreak. And no sentence, no verdict, no prison can ever undo that. In the end, Judge Eleanor Hart became her own courtroom, her mind the bench, her heart the jury, her guilt the sentence. She tried to balance love and law and lost both, because justice may be blind, but heartbreak, it never is. This was the story of Judge Eleanor Hart, a woman who spent her life serving justice until the law she lived by turned against her own heart. She believed control could protect her from pain, but in the end, it only delivered her to tragedy. Because when love stands trial, there are no winners, only sentences that last forever. Thank you for watching. This is Murder Book 360, where every crime has a heartbeat, and every heartbeat tells a story. If this case moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories where justice, emotion, and truth collide. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and remember, some verdicts can never be overturned.